I'll never forget the moment my son's bride screamed at me to get out of the wedding I paid for, standing on that Santa Fe rooftop with $600,000 of my money lighting up the desert sky behind her. The same rooftop where I'd just honored my dead wife with art that made grown collectors weep. The same woman who was about to destroy everything I'd built in 71 years of bleeding onto canvas. My name is Elliot Whitaker, and I'm about to tell you how I burned down a wedding without striking a single match. I was born in these high desert canyons of New Mexico, raised on dust storms and impossible sunsets. 71 years on this earth, white guy with paint permanently under my fingernails and turpentine in my blood. I've spent 5 decades turning grief into abstract explosions of color that hang in the Museum of Modern Art, pieces that sell for 7 figures to people who've never felt real loss. But I have. 10 years ago, cancer took my wife Clara from me. Took her slowly, painfully, 1 chemo session at a time, until there was nothing left but her voice on my phone and the memory of her hands covered in clay from the pottery classes she taught at the Santa Fe Indian School. She mentored young artists the way Georgia O'Keeffe mentored her, passing down not just technique but soul. I channeled that pain into my work. Every stroke, every canvas became a conversation with her ghost. Critics called it genius. I called it survival. I hiked the Pecos wilderness with a broken ankle just to capture the dawn light on aspen leaves the way she used to see it. When a flash flood destroyed half my studio on Canyon Road, I rebuilt it in 3 weeks, working 20-hour days because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant drowning. My son Nathan grew up watching me transform agony into art. 35 years old now, talented sketch artist with his mother's eyes and my restless hands. But where I found purpose in the work, Nathan found drift. He'd hop from project to project, gallery to coffee shop, never quite landing anywhere solid. Then he met Vanessa. She swept into his life during Fiesta Week last year, all sharp cheekbones and sharper ambitions. An influencer from Albuquerque's old town with 70,000 followers and eyes that calculated dollar signs before they saw people. She told Nathan she wanted to revolutionize the Southwest art scene, blend traditional with digital, create something that honored heritage while building empire. I saw hunger in her, the kind that's never satisfied. But Nathan saw salvation, and maybe that's what he needed. Someone who believed in something, even if that something was just herself. When they got engaged 6 months later, Nathan asked if I'd help with the wedding. Help. That's what he said. What he meant was fund. $500,000 for the venue, another $100,000 for vendors, photographers, the whole Santa Fe dream package. La Fonda's rooftop overlooking the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, those ancient peaks that turn blood red at sunset like they're named for. I said yes without hesitation. Nathan was my only child, my last piece of Clara walking this earth. If money could buy him happiness, I'd drain my accounts dry. Vanessa wanted it during Fiesta Week, when the whole city comes alive with burning zozobra and lowriders cruising the plaza. She said it would be perfect for content, perfect for her brand. I should have heard the warning bells then, should have recognized that she saw my son's wedding as a marketing opportunity. But I was too busy planning my tribute. Clara used to recite Georgia O'Keeffe poems while she worked, her voice soft and steady like water over stones. I'd recorded her once, years before she got sick, just capturing a random afternoon in the studio. I'd kept that recording like a sacred relic, only listening when the grief got too heavy to carry alone. For the wedding, I created something special. A massive canvas installation, abstract swirls of red and ochre that captured every sunset Clara and I had ever watched together. Hidden inside was a projector, synced to activate during the vows. Her voice would fill that rooftop, reciting O'Keeffe's words about New Mexico's savage beauty, while my painted storms swirled behind the couple. It was going to be magic, a way to have Clara at her son's wedding, to honor the woman who'd taught him to see color before he could walk. I hired the best of everything. Louis, my oldest friend who'd sung at the St. Francis Cathedral for 30 years before starting his catering empire, the string quartet from the Lensic Theater, mariachi players from the Santa Fe Opera. I even commissioned 3 Taos Pueblo artists to create custom pieces for the tables, blending tradition with celebration. The guest list read like a who's who of the art world. NYC dealers who'd made fortunes off my work. collectors who owned entire wings of their mansions dedicated to Southwest artists, local legends whose names carried weight from Canyon Road to the Metropolitan Museum. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. The day arrived with that particular New Mexico light that makes the whole world look like it's been dipped in honey and fire. The rooftop glowed golden, 200 guests in their finest, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. Zozobra would burn that night in the plaza below, the annual purging of gloom, but up here we were celebrating new beginnings. Nathan looked happy. Genuinely happy for the first time in years. He wore a custom suit the color of adobe clay, Vanessa beside him in white that probably cost more than most people's cars. The vows began. The sun started its descent, and I activated the tribute. Clara's voice flooded that rooftop like a monsoon. Her words, soft and steady, reciting Georgia O'Keeffe's poetry about New Mexico's bones and blood-red earth. Behind Nathan and Vanessa, my painted installation came alive, swirling colors projected onto the canvas that seemed to breathe with every syllable my dead wife spoke. The guests went silent. 200 people frozen in that moment between heartbeats. I watched their faces transform from polite attention to something deeper, something raw. A collector from Manhattan had tears streaming down her cheeks. One of the Taos Pueblo artists pressed his hand to his heart. Even the mariachi players stopped tuning their instruments to listen. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was everything Clara would have wanted for our son's wedding day. Then I saw Vanessa's face. She stood there in her expensive white dress, her perfectly made-up features twisting into something ugly. Not sadness, not even discomfort. Pure rage. The kind that comes from someone who realizes they're not the center of attention for 30 seconds and can't handle it. Nathan looked confused, glancing between his bride and the installation, like he couldn't understand why anyone would be upset by something so clearly made with love. That's when I should have known. Should have seen that my son was already lost, caught between the woman who raised him and the woman who was using him. The tribute ended. Clara's voice faded into the desert air like it had been carried away by the wind. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. People were standing, some hugging each other, all of them moved by what they'd just witnessed. All except Vanessa. She turned on those expensive heels and walked straight toward me. Her face had that influencer smile plastered on for the cameras, but her eyes were dead cold. When she got close enough that only I could hear, the mask dropped completely. "You're nothing but a dusty old canvas, Elliot. Get out before you ruin our brand." Brand. She called her wedding day a brand. My $600,000 gift, my tribute to the woman who taught Nathan everything about seeing beauty in the world, reduced to a marketing problem. I felt something crack inside me. Not break. Crack. Like those adobe walls after a hard freeze, the kind that starts small but spreads until the whole structure comes down. I smiled at her. That probably scared her more than anything. But 71 years on this earth teaches you something about controlling your reactions, about choosing your moments. This wasn't the moment to explode. This was the moment to start painting a new picture entirely. "All right, darlin'," I said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "You're absolutely right. This is your day." I pulled out my phone and started texting. Luis first, then the string quartet, then every single vendor I'd personally contracted through my company, Whitaker Adobe Studios, LLC. Every contract had the same clause buried in the fine print. The client representative, me, had full authority to release vendors from service if conditions became untenable. I'd learned that trick after a bad gallery deal 30 years ago. Always keep control. Always have an exit strategy. The caterers started packing first. Luis and his team covering the tamales, wheeling away the tequila bars, folding up the tables loaded with calabacitas and carne adobada. The confusion spread through the crowd like wildfire through juniper. The string quartet stopped mid-song. Just stopped, packed their instruments, and walked toward the elevators. The mariachi players followed. Then the photographer, the videographer, the florist who'd spent 2 days creating arrangements that matched my painting's color palette. Vanessa's face went from rage to panic in about 3 seconds flat. She lunged for my phone, trying to see what I was doing, and that's when her purse flew open. papers scattered across that rooftop like leaves in a canyon wind. But one paper caught my eye. A canvas authentication certificate. My signature at the bottom, except I'd never signed it, never even seen the painting it was supposedly authenticating. I bent down and picked it up before she could stop me. My hands were steady even though my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. The painting in the photo was good. Damn good. Almost good enough to be one of mine. But I knew every brushstroke I'd ever made, and this wasn't mine. "This is interesting," I said, holding it up so the nearest guests could see. "When exactly did I paint this piece? Because I have no memory of creating it." Vanessa's face went white under her makeup. Nathan looked confused, then horrified as he started to understand what he was seeing. The guests began murmuring, and suddenly those art world dealers were paying very close attention. "Give that back," Vanessa hissed. "You're humiliating yourself." "No," I said quietly. "I'm protecting my legacy. There's a difference." That's when Nathan finally spoke up. "Dad, stop. Please, just stop." His voice cracked on that last word, and I heard something in it I hadn't heard in years. Fear. Real. Bone-deep fear. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The bags under his eyes that expensive suits couldn't hide. The way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. The weight he'd lost over the past 6 months that I'd attributed to wedding stress. And I knew. Somehow, I just knew. This wasn't just Vanessa's scheme. Nathan was in on it. My boy, my only child, the one person I would have done anything for, was helping his bride to beforge my paintings. The rooftop had gone completely silent now. 200 guests watching a family implode in real time, better than any performance art they'd ever seen. I walked off that rooftop with the forged certificate in my hand, and 200 witnesses who'd just watched me dismantle a wedding like pulling threads from a weaving. Vanessa was screaming behind me. Nathan was trying to calm her down, and I could hear the chaos spreading through that party like wildfire through drought-dry Camisa. But I wasn't done, not even close. I drove home in silence that night, my old Ford pickup rattling down Canyon Road while Zozobra burned in the plaza behind me. All those people gathered to burn away their gloom, their bad luck, their old sorrows. I wondered if they had a puppet big enough to burn away the betrayal of your only child. The adobe house sat quiet when I got there. The same house Clara and I had restored together in the 80s, buying it cheap from some burnt-out art colony dropout who couldn't handle the isolation. We'd carved every Viga's beam by hand, built every Kiva fireplace with our own sweat and dreams. Now those walls felt like they were closing in on me. I spent that night going through files, bank statements, contracts. Every interaction I'd had with Vanessa over the past 2 years since Nathan brought her home during Spanish Market. That first meeting should have told me everything I needed to know. She'd walk through our house calling our hand-woven Chimayo blankets quaint relics while eyeing my studio walls like she was calculating auction prices. She'd mentioned the new Institute of American Indian Arts expansion nearby, how the land values were going to explode, how someone smart could make a fortune. I'd dismissed it as the enthusiasm of youth, fatherly blindness, the worst kind. But then I found it in my records. Vanessa Martinez, former assistant to Clara at Site Santa Fe Gallery, the one who'd borrowed my wife's curation ideas for a show and launched her own career on them. Clara had been too kind to call it theft, had even written Vanessa a recommendation letter when she left. My dead wife had helped the woman who was now forging my paintings. The anger hit me so hard I had to sit down. $50,000 I'd given them for that indigenous art NFT app that failed spectacularly. $75,000 for a Bali influencer retreat that was supposed to be marketing. All of it documented as loans that were never going to be repaid. I'd been funding my own betrayal, one check at a time. That's when my phone rang. Luis, calling from his truck where he'd stashed all the wedding food. "Amigo," he said, laughing despite everything. "Your tamales are safe." But Vanessa's face when those vendors walked out? Pricier than a Remington bronze? We laughed together. Then I cried. Then I got back to work. I'd learned a few tricks over the years from a young protege at the POA Cultural Center. Tech stuff that an old painter probably shouldn't know but found useful in a digital world. Hacking isn't the right word. Let's call it unauthorized access to information that concerned my own artwork. Vanessa's emails laid it all out like a gallery exhibition. The forgery scheme was elaborate. She'd been collecting my old brushes, scanning the bristle patterns, studying my techniques for months. The plan was to announce my retirement right after the wedding, flood the market with lost Whitakers, and cash in before anyone could authenticate properly. And Nathan knew. Every step of the way my son knew. But there was more. Bank statements showing regular withdrawals from Nathan's account at Buffalo Thunder Casino. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. My boy was bankrupt from poker and too ashamed to tell me, too desperate to say no when Vanessa offered him a way out. I sat in that studio until dawn broke over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting my rage onto canvas, violent slashes of red and black, colors that looked like blood and earth mixed together. Clara used to say I painted best when I was feeling most, and that night I felt everything. The monsoon hit the next afternoon right on schedule. New Mexico summer storms that turn streets into rivers, and the whole city smells like wet earth and ozone. The kind of rain that feels like the sky is trying to wash everything clean. That's when they showed up at my studio, both of them. Nathan looking like he hadn't slept, Vanessa with that same calculating expression she'd worn on the rooftop. They walked in without knocking, tracking mud across the concrete floors. "Explain the forgeries, Vanessa," I said. My voice was steady as stone, calm as those miraculous stairs at Loretto Chapel that stand without support. She laughed, actually laughed. "You're hoarding glory, old man. Santa Fe's evolving. IAIA grads need space, not your ego taking up oxygen. The art world has moved on, but you're still painting like it's 1985. Nathan looked at the floor. I waited for him to defend me, to say something, anything that proved he was still my son underneath all this mess. Nothing came. So I pulled out my phone and showed them the emails. Every single one. The forgery plans, the market manipulation strategy, the timeline for my forced retirement. I watched Vanessa's face go from confident to careful in about 3 seconds. "Where did you get those?" she demanded. "Does it matter?" I asked. "The question is, what happens now?" That's when Nathan finally spoke. "Dad, his voice cracked. "The gambling. I thought her plan would save us. I'm in deep. 200,000 deep. I didn't know what else to do. $200,000. My son stood there in my studio with rain pounding the tin roof, admitting he'd gambled away enough money to buy a house in this town, enough to fund 10 young artists' careers, enough to honor Clara's memory in ways that actually mattered. I wanted to rage at him, wanted to throw him out the same way Vanessa had thrown me out of that wedding, but when I looked at Nathan's face, I didn't see a manipulative schemer. I saw a drowning man who'd grabbed onto the wrong lifeline. Before I could respond, the studio door burst open. Mia rushed in, soaking wet, clutching a laptop like it was sacred. She was one of my scholarship students from Santa Fe Prep, half Navajo kid with more talent in her little finger than most professionals have in their whole bodies. "Mr. Whitaker," she gasped, "you need to see this. Now." The laptop was Vanessa's. She'd left it at the gallery after the wedding chaos, and Mia had been cleaning up. Smart girl hadn't just found it. She'd opened it, found emails that made the forgery plan look like small-time theft. Vanessa had been planning to burn down my studio, make it look like an electrical fire during monsoon season when lightning strikes are common, destroy the evidence of her forgeries while collecting on my insurance. The emails laid it out in clinical detail, complete with a timeline and a contact who specialized in untraceable accelerants. My son's face went gray. "I didn't know about this," he whispered. "Dad, I swear I didn't know." Vanessa lunged for the laptop, but Mia was faster. The girl danced back, holding it out of reach. That's when Vanessa made her worst decision of the day. She grabbed a bottle of turpentine from my workbench and splashed it across one of my canvases. The one I'd been working on all night. The rage painting. The one that was probably the most honest thing I'd created in 10 years. She pulled out a lighter. Nathan tackled her before the flame even sparked. My son, the one who'd betrayed me, who'd helped plan to forge my life's work, threw himself at his bride and brought her crashing down into paint-stained concrete. The turpentine bottle shattered. The lighter skittered across the floor. "Enough!" Nathan shouted. His voice cracked but held firm. "This is Dad's life. This is his legacy. I was wrong. We were wrong. But I won't let you burn it down." That's when Luis showed up with what he called reinforcements. Turned out he'd called his friends from the Cathedral Basilica Choir. 10 people showed up at my studio in the middle of a monsoon, and when Vanessa started screaming threats, they started singing. Loud. Hymns that drowned out everything else and probably confused my neighbors into thinking I'd started hosting church services. It would have been funny if it wasn't so broken. I called the cops. Santa Fe PD showed up, these 2 officers who'd worked security at Fiesta for the past decade and knew me from gallery openings. They looked at the scene like they'd walked into a particularly weird art installation, turpentine everywhere, a bride in a ruined wedding dress, a choir singing Hallelujah, my son sitting in the corner with his head in his hands. The officers wanted to press charges. Attempted arson, fraud, conspiracy. They had me as laptop evidence, witness statements from the wedding guests, enough to put Vanessa away for years. But I looked at Nathan, really looked at him, saw him the way Clara would have seen him. Not as the man who betrayed me, but as the boy who'd lost his mother too young and never quite found his footing after. The kid who'd made terrible choices because he was scared and desperate and too proud to ask for help. I declined to press charges. For Nathan's sake, not for Vanessa's. She could lawyer up and fight her own battles. But I wouldn't be the one to put my son's wife in prison on their wedding day, even if that wedding had imploded before the cake was cut. The officers took Vanessa away for questioning. Nathan stayed behind, sitting on my studio floor surrounded by ruined canvases and broken dreams. I sat down next to him. We didn't speak for a long time, just listened to the rain and breathed the same air. "Build your own mesa, boy," I finally said. "Stop trying to stand on mine." He nodded, started crying. I put my arm around him the way I used to when he was little and had nightmares, felt him shake with sobs that came from somewhere deep and old and wounded. That's when Luis poked his head back in. The choir had left. The rain was letting up. He looked at us sitting there in the wreckage and smiled. "You know what's crazy? Half those wedding guests are still at La Fonda, soaked but loyal, and they're asking if you have any art to sell." I laughed. Actually laughed. What am I supposed to sell them? Turpentine-soaked disasters? Luis shrugged. "Call it monsoon art, call it wedding chaos collection. Hell, call it anything. Those people came to Santa Fe to buy stories, and you just gave them the best one they'll hear all year." He wasn't wrong. I looked around at the canvases splashed with turpentine, marked with footprints, stained with rain that had blown in through the open door. They were chaotic, violent. Honest in a way my carefully composed abstracts sometimes weren't. So I did something crazy. I invited those guests to my studio, told them they could bid on the monsoon masterpieces, the paintings that had been collateral damage in a family war, raw and unfinished and absolutely real. They came. 50 soaking wet collectors and art dealers who'd watched my world explode on that rooftop, and they walked into my studio like they were entering a gallery opening. Except this wasn't champagne and careful lighting. This was turpentine fumes and rain-soaked canvas, and the raw truth of what happens when a family breaks. Luis set it up like a proper auction. He'd done charity events for the cathedral for years, and knew how to work a crowd, called out pieces one by one. The rage painting Vanessa had tried to burn. The installation canvas from the wedding with Clara's voice still echoing in everyone's memory. Even some older works I'd been keeping in storage, pieces too personal to sell until now. The bidding started slow, then caught fire. A Manhattan dealer paid $40,000 for the turpentine-splashed canvas, said it was the most honest work he'd seen from me in a decade. A Taos collector took 3 pieces for $75,000 combined. One of the IAIA board members bought the wedding installation for $120,000, said it belonged in their permanent collection. Nathan sat in the corner watching it all, his face a mix of shame and something that might have been hope. Every sale was another piece of his debt getting smaller, another step away from the hole he'd dug himself into. By the time the last guest left, we'd raised $300,000 on the spot, cash and checks and wire transfer confirmations lighting up my phone. Luis looked at the total and whistled. Not bad for a ruined wedding, he said. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The next morning, still smelling like turpentine and rain, I called every major gallery that carried my work. Told them I was doing a formal auction in 3 weeks at the rail yard. A special collection called Monsoon Ruins. Every piece from that night in the studio, plus some new works I'd create specifically for the event. All proceeds going to art scholarships in Clara's name. The art world loves a dramatic story almost as much as they love good paintings. The auction sold out in 48 hours. The months that followed blurred together like watercolors in humidity. Santa Fe winter settling in with its bone-deep cold and farolito lights glowing on every adobe roofline. I painted like a man possessed, created a whole series inspired by that night. Chaos and redemption, betrayal and forgiveness. All of it raw and real and honest in ways my earlier work had sometimes avoided. Nathan filed for divorce 2 weeks after the wedding that never was. Vanessa fought it, tried to claim she deserved half of everything, but her lawyer took one look at the evidence and advised her to take whatever settlement was offered. She disappeared back to Albuquerque, tried to rebrand her gallery as some kind of feminist art collective. Karma had other plans. Her forgery scheme got exposed at the international folk art market when a collector tried to authenticate one of the fake Whitakers. Forensic analysis proved it was done with brushes I hadn't used in 15 years. The scandal spread through the Southwest art scene like wildfire. Her gallery folded within a month. Last I heard, she'd moved to Phoenix and was working social media for a car dealership. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a quiet sense that the universe had balanced its own books. Nathan hit bottom hard, sold everything he owned to start paying back his gambling debts. Moved into a tiny casita near the Santa Fe River, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbors sneeze through the walls. Started selling sketches at the rail yard artisan market for $20 apiece, standing in the cold with other struggling artists while tourists haggled over prices. I let him fall. Had to. Clara would have understood. Sometimes love means watching someone hit rock bottom so they can learn to climb back up on their own. But I also started teaching again. Mentoring at the public schools and the Boys and Girls Club, teaching kids from the pueblos and the barrios to paint petroglyphs and abstract interpretations of their heritage. It was what Clara had always dreamed of doing more of, before cancer stole her time. Every class I felt her there, guiding my hands, helping me see what these kids needed, not just technique but belief that their stories mattered, that their art could change their lives the same way it had changed mine. The formal Monsoon Ruins auction happened on a cold January night. The rail yard packed with collectors from New York to Los Angeles. Critics who'd written me off as past my prime suddenly calling the new work groundbreaking, prices that made even my earlier success look modest. Final total, $1.2 million. Every cent going to art scholarships in Clara's name. Enough to fund 50 full rides to art school. Enough to change lives for a generation. I stood there watching the final bids come in, and felt Clara's hand on my shoulder as clear as if she were still alive. This is what she'd wanted. Not monuments or museums with her name. Just opportunities for kids who had talent but no path forward. The winter passed. Christmas on Canyon Road with farolitos glowing like prayers along every wall. Caroling at San Miguel Church where Clara and I got married 40 years ago. The anniversary hit me hard that year, but different than before. Not drowning grief, but something gentler. Memory mixed with gratitude for what we'd had. That's when Nathan showed up at my door.
Revenge never ends. It only waits.